Hello, I'm Michel Gagné, and you are listening to the Real-Time Visual Effects Podcast, where wizards reside.
You have a gift. You have a passion for creation. There's something inside you that wants to express itself, and that something has led you to explore the world of visual effects, a place where magic happens, and the only limitation is your imagination. All the greatest artists in the world started somewhere, learning and growing into the people they are today. You, being here, is the first step to building your legacy as an artist. Learn from the best and brightest in the real-time visual effects community. Sharpen your skills and be your best self. Today's episode is an interview with Niels Dewitte, and he is a VFX artist who left Europe to move to a job in Japan. And it's so awesome to hear about his experience with the culture shock that comes with working in a different country. And it's really interesting to learn about the Eastern influence really affects how VFX are made. With that said, let's jump in.
Here is your host, Travis McCallum.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Today I've got Niels Dewitte, and he has worked on the video game Phantom Covert Ops and is currently working at Agni-Flare and has worked at studios like nDreams in the past. Niels, how you doing today, man?
Yeah, I'm all right.
How's the weather in Japan?
Well, currently it's completely dark outside because it's 11. But it was really good weather today, for winter.
Yeah, y'all are on the other half of the world, at least from the US. So I want to get into all the cool stuff that you're working on, being involved in the real-time visual effects forums and some of these other projects that you may be doing. But before that, how'd you get started in visual effects?
Right. So I went to university in Belgium in it was called Digital Arts and Entertainment, courses on game development, essentially. And I did game development programming, essentially, for like C#, C++, like programming for games. And some of the courses that we had, just because like it was a more general direction, we had courses on art, and I got really, really interested into the art part of games as well. And I found it kind of a shame that when I went into the industry that I would have to choose between art and programming. So I wanted to do something which combined those two things, which at that point you only really have two options left. Either you're a technical artist or you're a VFX artist. And just VFX are just super cool. I had been working on like VFX stuff like even before I started, but just like offhandedly without really much interest into it. And as I got further and further into that like learning process, my passion for VFX grew, and I did more and more and more with it until eventually I decided this is probably more what I want to do than the programming. So I joined the contest. I won the contest. I had one of the companies that organized the contest asked me, do you want to work here? And I said, yeah, of course. Started working there as a VFX artist.
Knowing that visual effects is something you're into, I'm curious to know, what is kind of like your definition of what real-time visual effects is? What does it mean to you?
Right. So VFX is kind of not really that well defined, even within the community, within the VFX community. There's like a lot of different people, a lot of different things that are being done with it. But typically it boils down to people using a very specific set of skills, typically particle systems and materials, to achieve a certain look, can be animation, can be background, but typically the set of skills that people have align way more than what eventual result, I suppose, they're going for. So you have these people who are really good with materials, which use those materials to make water shaders, and they're being called VFX artists. And then you've also got people who typically work on explosions and stuff, also being called VFX artists. But what they typically have in common is like the set of skills that they have. They're being able to use particle effects and their animation principles and the shapes and the colors to create the things that they make.
Do you feel like a lot of those skills that you're describing are those used across, VFX artists in film and maybe in games? Or is there kind of a differentiation between the real-time aspect versus, say, just non-real-time? You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. There's definitely gonna be like differences once you cross into the real-time, because people have to know this pipeline suddenly. People have to realize what they're building this on top of. so they don't mess with the system, which isn't as much of a problem in film as essentially having unlimited, not unlimited, but a whole other range of possibilities there. Also, VFX for film is typically done in a way broader. People are being called VFX even way broader than what we're doing in games, right? People making rigs for films are often also already labeled VFX artists just because they happen to work on the VFX shots, which isn't the case for games.
So what do you wish you had known when starting out to become a visual effects artist? What are some of those things? If you could talk to yourself maybe 5-10 years ago and had said, hey, maybe I should have did this instead.
Well, so the thing that I initially struggled very, very much with is kind of just finding VFX, finding the resources, finding the other people who did it, finding what I should do, finding the path, which I found when I originally, I think a lot of other VFX, game VFX artists have probably found that as well, is that for me specifically was Jason Kaiser's introduction to VFX, videos which he put on YouTube completely for free, which I saw and was like, oh, so this is how you're supposed to, this is what VFX is actually. It's not just particles. There is this whole idea behind it. I feel like if there's just one thing that I would have wanted to tell myself, is just go and watch this. This is what you need. Because I have searched for that for a long time before I start. And then the other thing probably is the forums where we can connect with each other. Whereas before that, I didn't really know anyone doing VFX, taking VFX seriously, or even having a passion for it. Once I found the forum, I was like, okay, right, we've got all these other people here doing the same thing. I can talk with them. I can figure stuff out. We can share in the passion.
What, you mean there's more to visual effects than just particle systems? I'm just kidding. But yeah, man, I totally agree. Having a community back in the olden days, that wasn't really a thing, and been able to put together one and really kind of find people that understand and connect and help you grow as an artist. And we'll definitely get into that in a little bit. What you're doing right now and where your mind and your headspace are. What are things that you're curious or interested in right now in just the visual effects industry?
Yeah, so currently one of the things definitely coming up is the Niagara particle system for Unreal, and then you've got the Unity kind of counterpart to it. They're going into this kind of scripting paradigm for particle systems, which I think is super interesting because I have a background as a programmer. Suddenly this opens up what I can do with particles and with simulation, since I can just write it myself. And the other thing which I'm super interested currently is in automatization and kind of building tools for workflows to kind of improve and speed up what I'm potentially even my colleagues are doing through things like Maya scripting, through Houdini, through.
Can you maybe talk us through a tool that maybe you've created in the past and kind of how that need came to be and how it helped others or yourself out?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of my proudest and one of my most used is a very simple tool. It's a spline generator in Unreal, using the splines that are already there to create meshes that we then can import or essentially bake to a mesh and then use in our particle systems, which kind of alleviates the need to go into Maya to have everything set up there, to export, have to re-export while iterating. With what I've done, we can do that in the engine, we can iterate in the engine, we can see what's happening in the engine. And once we're happy with it, just use that mesh particle system and it will just work, which I think is great, and it speeds it up so much.
Yeah, that's cool. I always like splines, especially when I'm making rivers or any kind of volcano. I'm glad you are behind the curtain making these amazing tools. As somebody who is involved with the community, you're often looking at other people's work and they're asking for feedback. And maybe even in your own workflow, you want feedback on your work. So whenever you're involved with that, what are some of the things that you're looking at and what are you looking for?
Right. So there's very much the basic things first, right? There's the animation principles, there is shapes and colors and just how all of that works together, how well thought out it is. And something that I've recently been thinking more and more about actually is kind of higher level motivation behind effects, which is essentially just a fancy, well, not even fancy way of saying why is, for example, your big character shattering in really, really small pieces? Why is that volume diminishing? Or where is the smoke coming from, right? It's like, how do we motivate our effects and how well do we motivate them? And I think that's something that I've essentially in the past, I've struggled actually to get that always on point, to get that aspect right. I knew about the animation principles, about the color, about how to make that work, how to get interest in my effect. But I didn't know how to motivate it properly. And that's something that I've kind of more and more in other people's work also started looking at as like higher level, like, okay, once we get all of the basic stuff right, how do we make sure that someone who's looking at it, that makes sense? Even within, for example, if you have a stylized effect, just because it's stylized doesn't mean that it doesn't have to make sense from a logical point of view. And so how do we kind of motivate the things that we're doing there? How do we motivate the smoke being there once we've made it?
Yeah, man. Have you seen Julian Love's GDC talk on Diablo and the effects they did on that? I think it was like 2010.
Yeah. I have seen that. I believe everyone's seen that at this point. It is a very, very good talk.
Yeah, well, you were talking about how some people, they just put a mishmash of different emitters together. And what is it? What's the intention? How do they work together?
Right.
That's kind of what I'm getting, is that when we talk about motivation, every single thing has to have a purpose and it has to work together. And you have to think about the intention behind and the reasoning behind that. Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah, exactly. That is, kind of thinking more than just on the per particle level or the per material level. It's everything working together, and do things have a logical reason behind being there? Yeah, very much.
Cool, man. So thinking about your own visual effects workflow, what's that process look like for you whenever you're creating a visual effect, maybe from start to finish?
Right. So the first part, and that's again something that I very much struggled with when I began, is making sure you know exactly what your manager or client or whomever it is you're working with, you're making your effect for, yourself, even if you're making something for yourself, knowing exactly what they want or as close as possible to that. And then from there, of course, you're going to start gathering your reference. You're going to start, making your sketches if it's necessary. You're going to make sure you kind of establish to yourself and to others often what you're going to make, what you're going to do. And then something that I like doing is figuring out what are going to be the difficult parts of what I'm doing, what are going to be the tricky parts, what is going to take me time, or perhaps what is going to be potentially even impossible within the setup that we have right now, and start researching those things first, start making sure that we have what we need to eventually assemble what we're making. Once you've done that, it's blocking out and putting your effect together in quick succession, and then you start iterating, making sure things look good, making sure things align with what you originally had intended, or maybe align with the direction you're shifting in, if that's what you want to do, and making sure that things make sense, right? And once you go in that iteration stage, maybe you're sending it off to a client, getting some feedback on it, or showing to the manager, getting some feedback on it. I think at that point you're just quite heavily focusing on just going through your effect, looking at parts of it and saying is this what I want? Is this what I want? Is this good enough? Does this align with what we want to do, what we want in general? And you iterate until you have your perfect effect or you run out of time, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good part, is to mention time. There has to be kind of constraint where enough is enough. We know perfection is the enemy of progress. Are there any effects that maybe you've worked on recently or kind of used that process to create? Any that come to mind kind of as a case study?
Well, most of the effects I've worked on recently are completely locked down and completely gone away from public. But I do have an effect for, a few months ago where, just a very, very simple teleport, or not even teleport, portal effect. Very simple idea. Just I want a portal. I want to be able to see through the portal. Kind of going through that. It's almost more technical art than VFX. I just very quickly gave myself hey, here's a day, make a portal, how far can you get? Kind of went through those stages really, really quickly and kind of really kind of tested how well that worked. Kind of started out with I want a portal, making sketches, what could a portal look like, going and looking in games how did they make portals, just finding the reference. And then what's going to be difficult about this? Well, I'm going to want to look through the portal. How am I going to do that? How am I going to make sure people can actually look through the portal. So
yes.
and what kind of ways can we do? We can't just put a texture on there because that's like, if you look around, if you just, this is not going to work. So I'm kind of doing the research in there. And once I had figured that out, then it was just a matter of making the materials, making the effect, and putting in the scene, looking what it looked like, seeing if I like it, and iterating until the day was over.
So thinking about that programming background, I know you were working in programming, transitioning from being a game programmer to visual effects. What was that like? Was there kind of like a big shift or paradigm, or did it just feel really natural and easy? Because I know you mentioned technical art is a big part of what you do and where you are.
Yeah, so essentially the only professional programming experience I have is as an internship. I have never actually worked as a professional programmer, but I have done it for 7-8 years in the background in between lessons, just as a hobby. But since I have never done it as like a professional thing, there wasn't really a transition which would be the same as for like a normal game programmer transitioning towards VFX. It was more like transitioning from being a student programming to being a professional VFX artist, which brings with it probably most of the same things as transitioning from student to professional, as in to learn to work in a studio where there are rules, where there are other people who are going to tell you no, your work sucks, you need to improve on that, where there are conventions and those need to be right, otherwise some script in the background that you don't know about fails. And I think those are...
I was going to say, thinking on the programming side and visual effects, how would you encourage people to kind of implement some of the programming in their visual effect work? What are some techniques, tips, or tricks that you can think of? Because a lot of people are afraid of, say, coding. They're like, oh, I just want to do art. And we know you can do visual effects just on the art side, but it is both art and tech, right?
Yeah, I think so. Like you say, you can do it just using art, but even if you're just an artist, just knowing about the programming and even being able to implement simple programs you can elevate your effects quite far. Just knowing how a material works and being able to make a material closer to what you imagine can help you a lot with creating your effects, instead of being stuck using other people's materials or other people's shaders if you work in an environment that works like that. As well as just general knowledge of the render pipeline, just general knowledge of how programming works or how your effect is eventually going to be used and implemented will also help you make sure your effects are optimized, are going to make sure your effects are, what the programmers are going to want or need to get that implemented. And then the last thing is, as we transition towards particle simulators, which do allow scripting, which do allow expressions and programmatic input, knowing programming and just even simple vector math will help you create behavior that someone who doesn't know the programming can obviously not implement in that case, or would need someone else to implement for them.
How has the job changed for you moving from Europe to Japan?
Right. So yeah, I worked in Britain before, actually. So I'm originally from Belgium. Then I moved to Britain to work there for about a year. I've kind of learned how the industry works from them and kind of their systems. And moving to Japan essentially means, okay, now we've got a different studio structure. Now we have we've got different rules. We've got different conventions. So you have to relearn that. But except for that, within the studio, the same tools are used, the same, the pipeline doesn't change. The tool sets don't change. While, the names might change, your approach to VFX doesn't really change that much just because the same software is used. Of course, language is a big barrier. My Japanese isn't brilliant. So I'm having to rely on my colleagues to do know English to kind of help me out there. And then just company culture is also different. People talk differently to each other. There's different rules of how to approach people, how to make sure you show respect, how to make sure that you're not offending people. That's different just from company to company. harmony and just between Europe and Japan, and the same is true for game companies, essentially.
I feel like you're in the heart of video game culture because Nintendo's there, Sony's there. I mean, you got everything except for Microsoft, right? So you just get to be with all these industry legends. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. There's like a lot of big companies originating in Japan. They have a very, in my opinion at least, very different view on what games are, at least originally. They're kind of merging right now. So Western and Japanese is kind of growing closer to each other, referencing each other a lot. For me, a big example of that is FromSoft's Dark Souls, in which essentially it's a Japanese company taking, Western style RPG concept, but then reintroducing things that we would never have thought about or like would have considered bad game design and making something really nice out of it, right? So
I want to touch base on what you mentioned with Western versus Eastern views of video games. What does Japan view games as opposed to Western?
I think so. Originally, right now they're merging, so it's harder to see. But originally, I feel like Western style games were way more focused on the conflict, often behind certain things. Way more like it's game design, of course, but I feel like conflict and war were way more of a focus for Western style games, while I feel like Japanese games more often than not like to reference nature and, how would you say that, they like a more existential kind of thing where they reference like the existence of dread, they reference the existence of natural disasters, not as a conflict with other people, but as a conflict with, or not even a conflict, but like an interaction with nature in a way.
So Niels, you won an award in visual effects and animation. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
The award is it's called Search for a Star, which is student entry contest, which they run every year. It's both a way to get students to kind of like students in their last years before entering the industry to try and build things that are ready for the industry, both to kind of show off what they can, to get feedback, and to connect with other people who are looking to do the same thing, which it's run out of the UK, but there's like a lot of other European countries in which different universities and schools kind of join in, kind of try to show what they have, what they can do, kind of highlight what their passion is, what they would like to do in the industry once they graduate. Yeah, I mean, it was a really interesting experience as a student, because you typically, as a student, you don't really get to make things like that. You have your courses, you make exactly what the course tells you, and you move on. And there is no like work cycle, there is no like, how would you do that in the industry? At least not where I was following courses. We moved on, we did our projects, and then we moved on, and there was no follow-up on that. While, when we did the contest, that was essentially like you make a project, you send it in, you get feedback, you make a new project, and the same people are going to see that. And eventually I went to the UK for a day to go and talk with like industry specialists, to go and hear their experience and to go and just have an interview with them and just talk with these people I was looking up to and such. And then eventually, apparently, they chose me to be the best VFX artist that year.
That's cool, man. It's always good to be recognized for your hard work and your efforts. Definitely encourage people to join these different contests that come up and try and win awards. Which, speaking of real-time visual effects, RTVFX.com, the forums, you're an admin for it. So what's that look like? What are your thoughts with all the stuff going on over there? And can you tell us a little bit about the contest that y'all have there?
Yeah, so essentially, realtimevfx.com is the forum which helped me become a VFX artist, and so now I want to return the favor. I want to help other people. I want to see what other people do and see what I can do to help to get them to like the same place as me. And I think the realtimevfx.com is like just the best place to do that. It's where people should, in my opinion at least, where people should go if they want to become a VFX artist. You're going to find all the best VFX artists. We can link you to the right tutorials, to the right places, can show you what to do. The contests we're doing are essentially sketches. We we come together with a whole bunch of people. We announce a theme or a challenge, and then people get a month to try their best to make as good as possible of a project, within the bounds of that challenge, within the bounds of that theme. We have people, a lot of the admins and the moderators of the forums, kind of at the end of the month, looking at all of the work and kind of analyzing it, trying to find who did the best and trying to give a little bit of feedback here and there. We all have busy schedules, not always possible, but yeah, that's kind of the idea behind it, is like give people a challenge so they can stretch their VFX muscles and kind of go wild a bit different than the studio where you often very limited. Go wild, go big, put in a month with a time schedule and try and get people to interact, try and get people to have fun with VFX essentially.
We're ready to get into the lightning round. Quick and fast, like visual effects. Are you ready?
Yeah, I suppose so.
You sounded a little hesitant there.
Yeah.
What is the perfect one-day getaway in Japan and the surrounding area?
Right. So currently I live in Yokohama. I think food here is amazing. So I would say go to a sushi shop or yakitori shop. They're amazing.
What video game or mobile app are you using on your phone that is the most fun?
The most fun? I play a heck of a lot of Rocket League. The VFX and Rocket League are amazing, and it's so much fun to drive around in cars and hit balls.
What is your favorite thing to cook or eat?
To cook salmon with just vegetables and some sauce. I'm great. I find that fine. To eat, well, in Japan they have really good food, so I would say sushi.
I'm a huge fan of sushi as well. I'm honestly perfectly content with California rolls, but is there any kind of specialty sushi rolls that you recommend?
Well, they don't really do rolls here, actually. In the most shops, they have what they call nigiri, which is just raw fish on top of the rice, but it's some of the best raw fish you're going to eat ever.
Cool, man. What is your favorite book or podcast you've listened to recently?
That's a very difficult one. I don't really do books that much, but I do have a favorite book, and it's a series. It's the Inheritance series by Christopher Paolini, which is dragons and fire and magic.
Great inspiration for your effects. Favorite video game visual effect you are jealous of that isn't your own?
I would have to go with Rocket League, the explosions, the goal explosions. I wish I had made I wish I had made some of those. Some of those feel so good.
Best advice for a first-time visual effects artist or someone looking to get into the industry?
Talk with other VFX artists. Make sure you get to know them. Make sure you know who other artists are, where they work, what they do.
What are you most excited about for the future of visual effects?
Yeah, scripted paradigms for particles for sure. It's going to be so much fun.
Can you elaborate? What is scripted paradigms?
Oh, as in using script, using code to drive particle simulations.
What question do you never get asked that you wish you were asked more often?
Why are you a VFX artist instead of what's VFX? Whenever I introduce myself.
Why are you a VFX artist?
Well, I told you at the beginning of the interview, but yeah, it's just a combination of tech and programming, tech and art, and just getting that to work together is so interesting to me.
Any final thoughts or things to plug?
Yeah, go to the realtimevfxforums.com. Make sure you're on there. Make sure you talk to people. Interact with us.
Awesome, Niels. I really appreciate you taking the time to meet today and kind of share your knowledge with everybody. Where can people contact you or get in touch?
Well, you can get in touch to me. The easiest way is probably if you're a VFX artist and you're on the forums, just message me on there. I will answer probably within 2 days. I have a LinkedIn, which is exactly my name, Niels Dewitte. I have a YouTube channel on which I'm called Wyvery, which is written not like Y, but like the kind of dragon, but a Y at the end.
Awesome, man. And we'll get all that in the show notes so people will have it all linked up there. I hope you enjoyed this interview with Niels Dewitte. It was an absolute honor to be able to talk with him. It is amazing how we are able to communicate with each other across the world. The internet has opened up the doors to so many possibilities. So understand that your art form is not limited by geography. Really push your visual effects to the level and look at how people across the world are doing it. Talking on remote work, our next episode is going to be looking at how you can build a routine and manage your time more productively as we move toward this work from home situation with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's really important for us to keep peace of mind and to continue to move on with our art and not give up to despair. Until next time, everybody, rock on.